Right, morning everyone. I am going to talk to you about using pages and how we used it in RE for assessment. So we used it on the topic Mark's Gospel, and last year I wasn't here, but the feedback was that it was a test. Mark's Gospel for Year 9s is not particularly interesting, they're not particularly engaged. There is a huge amount of content for us to cover, and that can be assessed. And so it was quite a challenging assessment, and our data, I suppose, suffered as a result. So we were given the task at the start of the year to look at digital creative ways of assessing, and so we chose Mark's Gospel in Year 9. So we came up with the idea really of creating a book, and as you can see, we chose an audience of, they were trying to create a Mark's Gospel for children, so then their language and the techniques, colour, images, etc. that they chose had to be appropriate for their audience. I suppose as well with our assessments, they tend to be very kind of time or heavy with writing. And those children who find it difficult with the pace and to express themselves in that written form in assessment find that they underachieve. And so we were saying that perhaps some students could verbally tell us more than they were able to produce in an assessment. So hopefully this was one way that we decided they could hopefully have some success. So this is what we created, and I went and saw Jamie, so I lead the Year 9 course, so I went and saw Jamie, and I have to say that I gave him some information about what we wanted and some instruction, a little bit like a task sheet, and Jamie really helpfully created this template for me. So all students received this template. I put it on iTunes U, and they were very quickly able to access it. Sorry, 2 seconds. So you can see it has a front cover. Okay, then we had some leading questions, some images, and we had some instructions on these slides as they went. They had to use different techniques, and I'll show you the marking key that we used to really, I suppose, encourage and push the different creative techniques in their assessment. But I suppose here you can see that we gave them really clear instructions about how to use different techniques such as audio. And we kept the audio to no more than 30 seconds per slide, just to manage, I suppose, that time scale, and that they should be concise with what they're talking about rather than just loads of quantity. So I'll just give you a look at the templates. So these are the kind of content that we covered. And what we did with our teaching as well, I planned the lessons, but the staff were able to then choose how much time they allowed for the teaching of topics and how much time they perhaps allowed for some independent work or application of what they've taught. So in my classes, for example, I would spend maybe a lesson and a half, perhaps teaching about parables in Mark's Gospel, and then I would allow them the remainder of that second lesson to then apply their knowledge directly to their assessment. And so they continually worked on it, and the timescale that we used was 4 weeks, given that we had the long weekend interruption as well. So it was 4 weeks, they could access it at home, they could do their independent work, but that was mainly in class time. So just some images, and again, there was some different instruction from staff, which was really good, and because it's the first time we've done it, we'll talk about that in one of our learning area meetings, and what went well in terms of instruction with these different images. For example, in my classes, if they used the parable of the sower, or when they did a miracle story, perhaps, if they did a healing miracle as part of their slide, then I suggested perhaps on the images they might demonstrate knowledge or understanding of a different miracle, so a nature miracle, and use captions to show that. So that was a miracle story. A story they had to select independently and explain what that story revealed about Jesus. That one. This was creative, so a digital task, an extension task. Majority of students did this. I've only seen from my 2 classes maybe about 3 or 4 so far that just haven't attempted it at all. And lots of people asked at the beginning, I don't have an Apple Pencil, but they were really quickly able to find ways around that, just using their finger, and they were very happy to share because of the time scale. If they weren't using their Apple Pencil in their lesson and working away, then they were happy to just hand it over to their friend or someone near them so that they could do that. And I'll show you some results of that. And then the final slide was about is Jesus in Mark's Gospel. So that's the template that we used, and as I said, that was really positive that all students started with that basic. Then I'll just show you the marking key that we use. So it's just a task sheet. It looks like normal from the beginning, some instructions, relevant materials, and this was the marking key that I created. So it was 25 marks for content, and you can see, which actually did really help the students, is that I've identified which slide is relevant for each of these, because they didn't necessarily make that connection themselves. So it's just 5 marks for each of the content slides. And then something I talked to Jamie about was perhaps that they would do the content, but not really apply them to the creative skills and push themselves there. So I thought that we had to apply a good chunk of marks to digital creativity. So again, I went back to Jamie. I don't know what an excellent skill in terms of devices is in Year 9. So Jamie came up with this 10-mark marking key for the students to try and push and guide that creative aspect of their assessment. So that was, I suppose, the process that we went through. So I'll just show you some examples of what the students in my class were able to create and some positives. So, not sure if anyone knows Nico Lee. Nico hates RE, hates being in the lessons, doesn't want to say anything. Any opportunity that he has to distract himself, particularly with devices, he will use. Found playing games. I had a conversation at parents' evening with him and his parents that he said, well, what's this got to do with me? Why should I study it? I don't want to do it. And he will never revise, he will never prepare for an assessment. And so his marks, his achievement is a lot lower than actually what he should be achieving in the subject, what he's capable of. So this was really positive, and this is a lot of really good quality work for Nico. You can see he's inserted his audio throughout. He's chosen his images to reflect the stories that he was able to explain. So this is his attempt at a lovely drawing. But I was really pleased that he had a go at it, that he's produced something for me, because typically it is hard to get him to put pen to paper in lessons. Very able student, and I'll let you listen to her audio. So you can see Sophia's kept the kind of main background of the template, but she's really considered her audience being children. So she tries to kind of segment the information using colour, and she extends herself, I suppose, for those high-achieving students through the quality of her audio.
Mark wrote his gospel for these early Christians to strengthen their faith again after being persecuted and mistreated for their beliefs. They needed to be assured that their suffering would be rewarded.
So the audio questions were, I suppose, the extension, the challenge task, and making connections, not just kind of regurgitating knowledge, but actually demonstrating an understanding and a connection between the different slides and the questions that we were asking of them. So this was Sophia's, and then this is her drawing, and then her final. Some positives that we found, one thing I would say is the pace of student work and the pace of lessons was really positive. If it was I teach one of my Year 9 classes 2 days a week, period 6, and from one of those days I gave them that independent time. If they weren't feeling like they were going to apply themselves and produce some quality work, they spent the time perhaps on the design element, so finding images, maybe doing their drawing, and then in other times they were able to then apply themselves to the, I suppose, more challenging engagement of their brain and do the writing aspects or the audio, where they had to think about it, look at their knowledge and write about their understanding. What also is good, that typically we're assessing a student's memory, their retention, when this was really about assessing their understanding of the content that we're teaching. it gave a lot of really positive time for in-class intervention, for student-teacher dialogue when they were working independently. They were asking really insightful questions in their discussion, and they were starting to make some connections themselves. It allowed for scaffolding, so each lesson kind of built on prior knowledge. So they had to perhaps draw on what they maybe knew about Jesus' beliefs from a previous lesson, from a previous slide, and make those connections. It was an opportunity for skill development in my classes. If certain students didn't know how to change backgrounds, format things, different text on pages, and pages is really, really simple to use. Then they actually kind of buddied up and started teaching each other quite naturally and saying, shouting out, oh, I know how to do that, and racing over to their peer and sharing their skills in that way. And that was really positive, and it happened quite naturally in my lessons. Engagement, as I've said, is a challenge in RE, and this, in my experience, was a really positive experience. I didn't have to battle with them, and I found, as I was circulating, I didn't really have students off task during the time that they were given to apply their knowledge, because it was chunked. It was teaching and learning new content, apply it. And then next lesson we were moving on, we were teaching, learning new content, apply it. And we always had that kind of deadline mapped out. I think that was all I was really going to say about it, except that, it was hopefully we're kind of marking at the moment, and we'll just reflect it and take any feedback from all the Year 9 teachers. But for me personally, with my 2 classes, it was really positive, and the marks that they're getting reflect higher percentages. So someone like Jack Davis, who has an IEP on the spectrum, he found term 1 really challenging, and he struggled with the pace of work, the pace of learning. He's a perfectionist, he doesn't like making mistakes, so writing is a real challenge for him, and assessments were completely overwhelming. And he produced something where he was able to achieve a passing grade, and he was engaged throughout. So that's what we did. Thanks.